Hello everyone, good morning. So here we are with our edition 2 of Zuperly Talks. So in the first edition we have spoken about Tally, and as I told, once I came to know about the story of Tally, I was very impressed. I was quite inspired as well. And likewise, recently I attended a talk from Y Combinator where founders of Replit have actually come and they spoke about Replit. So until then there was actually very minimal information on how Replit came into existence. So that was kind of first talk which they have given. And once I heard their story, it was too good to be real. And I was very, very inspired and a lot of ups and downs. It's too good to believe, as I told you. And in one line, if you have to ask me, like, how do you describe Replit? All I got to say is it's just like 12 years of overnight success. And right now, they are a super successful company. They've recently raised a big round and they are on path to break more records or, get more funding rounds. So that is something I felt would be quite interesting for us to get a deeper insight into how exactly they started, what are they about, and what is their next steps. All these things we'll cover in this Zuperly Talks. I hope this will be a good session for all of us. And towards the end of it, I'll just share some takeaways as well. And especially since most of you are developers within our team, I think this will be quite interesting for you guys. So yeah, first of all, let's begin with what exactly is Replit. So Replit is nothing but it's an integrated development environment and it can be used for various programming languages. So right now I think they have more than 50 plus programming languages which you can actually use Replit for. And initially it was actually known as Repl.it, where the full form stands for Read, Evaluate, Print, Loop. But then later they changed it to Replit.com because there were some domain issues with .it renewal. And also the frustrating part was people were spelling it as Replit, but that was not the case, and that's why they changed it to Replit.com. So some of the key features of Replit on why it became successful are: one is collaborative coding, which probably didn't exist previously, I suppose, debugging, hosting and unit testing, syntax highlighting, version control, and most importantly, code generation via artificial intelligence. So they have some cutting edge features which they have launched recently, and all of them have been accepted by the wider developer community. Simply to summarize, it's an end-to-end programming platform. And currently a total of 5 billion programs are running on Replit. And as I mentioned in the beginning itself, it took them 12 years to start and become a big company. And the founders are from Jordan, and their simple mission is to get 1 billion developers on the platform. And here is a simple graph on how many website apps are created. So you can see the graph is just exploding, and that kind of explains the success of the company. So before we jump into other things, first let us understand why of Replit, like what exactly Replit stands for and where did it start, what is the backstory, all that. So Amjad Hassad is the founder of Replit. He was originally working on IT and cybersecurity, and he was doing multiple jobs. And in computer science classes, every time whenever he wanted to start coding, what he realized was it took a lot of time to set up the dev environment, which he felt was quite frustrating. So even as I told before, writing a line of code, there were many hurdles to actually start off, and that experience was frustrating for him. And he observed that tech was significantly improving, and he wanted to build something which could open a browser and let developers code and not worry about rest of the other things. So that is how that was the first simple idea with which Replit actually started. Now that why is done, let's get into the how of Replit. And I've divided into two parts because it's kind of quite fascinating to see how all they got into it. As I told, in 2008, the founder was just 21 and went to university while working simultaneously. And in one of the experiences he shared, he hacked into a university database and he got into big trouble. But that was how he was dabbling into different things. And he first started to write every programming language in Python, but then he felt it was not practically possible. And irrespective of any language, as I told, it took him days, weeks, or sometimes hours together to set up the dev environment, which was frustrating. And that was the first thing which actually helped him to do something beyond what was actually available there. And he thought they should just start a browser tab and start programming. And the biggest inspiration for him was Google Docs and how advanced it was. Until then, I think you just had MS Word where you had to send a word, somebody should edit and then send it back. But once Google Docs came in, everything was collaborative. You could actually collaborate and write in real time. And that was quite interesting for him. And that triggered the idea for him to write and share code all in a web browser. So the next 2 years he spent on an open source product with Haya Ode, who's his co-founder currently. But at that time, it was just like she was a friend and he just asked her help. The open source product was called PyRepl. which allowed him to compile languages in Python. But then in 2012, after his work for 2 years, he just put up a simple landing page and he launched it on Hacker News. As a lot of you know, Hacker News is quite famous across the world, and a lot of developers or indie hackers or indie developers, all of these people get on Hacker News to get their initial launch. And that's exactly what Amjad has done, and he's actually a big time user of Hacker News. So he's been very active there. And once he put up a landing page, it blew up. And that was the first indication for him, like maybe he's built something which was worthy enough. And eventually, as I told, founders got married, like Haya Ode and Amjad Hassid are real life partners as well. Like in Tally, how we discussed, they're also real life partners. And then they first met in another startup as an engineer and a designer. So they were not actually full-time working on Replit at that point. It was just a side project of Amjad. And while they were working in this other startup, they felt that the company was not going anywhere and they couldn't see a personal growth for themselves. And that's when they decided that maybe I think this is not the right place for us to be, so let's move on to other things. They pitched to a lot of VCs. Like after that stint at the startup, they wanted to again get back to Replit, and they started pitching it to a lot of VCs, but none of them funded it. In fact, they dismissed the idea like it's not a big thing, or a lot of big companies are there, like there are new emerging companies like Microsoft, Google, who can actually surpass you. So why would anybody care about your product? So that was the feedback they got. They just kept shipping the features as much as they could. So many companies were using their open source technology, and suddenly they started getting a lot of job opportunities from all top companies, because it was getting quite popular on this Hacker News and other places, because of which Amjad has got a lot of attention from companies and he was getting a lot of job offers. And that's when I think most of you have heard about the company called Code Academy, and they initially built their initial MVP on Replit. And that's how they were very familiar with Replit. And Code Academy was getting out of Y Combinator, which is the most successful accelerator in the world. And that's how they got introduced to YC. Like Amjad and Haya, they were introduced to YC. So before pursuing further on this Replit open source project, Code Academy actually offered a good full-time role to Amjad, and they asked him to relocate. And the first thing they thought was like where to relocate. Like Amjad and Haya discussed on it, like where to relocate. And they felt New York would be the best place to relocate. And without any further ado, they just went to New York. And this is the first picture of Amjad in New York in their first month once he relocated. So now coming to the second part. So until now, as I told, it was just a side project, but the growth was quite good. People were using it quite a bit. And now he's joined Code Academy. After their job, he joined Code Academy. Code Academy offered a job, and he relocated to New York, got into job stints first at Code Academy. I think he worked there for 2 years. And then he got into Facebook, where he was developing React Native, and he worked there for another 2.5 years. So in total, he worked for 4.5 years. And since he got so busy at these two companies, he was not finding time for anything else. So he didn't actually bother much about Replit. In fact, he completely ignored it. At that time, actually, Haya was also looking for jobs in New York, but for 2 years, she was struggling to get a job. She felt a lot of pain out of it. And that's when Amjad casually asked him, like, maybe I'll give you a stint for 1 year. Why don't you try this job? So I have this open source project called Replit. Why don't you actually work on it? And then we'll see where it takes. So that got him thinking as well, and he wanted to see, is it actually a possible thing to do? And that's when they saw that the growth was still exploding. Although they didn't focus much, there were a lot of bugs, but a lot of developers were using it. They were at the crossroads, like, should we pursue this, or is there something else we could do? That set the phase for them for the next phase. So this is how this is what the why and how of Replit is. And before we get into the other things, like how did they eventually get into the foundation, and how they started their journey. So if you ask me, a simple analogy for Replit is, it's like a mix of Google Docs, Figma, and Roblox. If you ask me in simple language, Figma, the reason why Figma became phenomenally successful was the collaboration part of it. Earlier, I think designers were not able to collaborate and edit together, but Figma made it possible. Similarly, this is exactly what Replit is doing for coding purpose. Similarly, in Roblox, if you see, it's a platform where teenagers could just build, sell games all within Roblox. Similarly, they want people to build, develop, and sell the software on Replit. And Google Docs, as I told, that was the primary inspiration for Amjad, where instead of sending files back and forth, you can write and collaborate real time on Google Docs. And that's exactly what he wanted to do for software development. So I hope this will actually give you a better understanding of what exactly Replit is doing. So okay, now this is all something which they have developed over years. But before all that, we'll just get to the foundation stage. Like how exactly the next step after like the crossroads at which they were in a dilemma, like what step to take next. this is the next step which further amplified their journey. So finally, they've decided that this is what they want to get into. They wanted to build this, they wanted to dedicate the next 5 to 10 years for Replit because there were some signals which they could understand. Like a lot of people, a lot of users were there. And Haya, being a designer herself, her first approach was like, why don't we talk to the users? Let us understand and take their feedback. And they had a diverse set of users like developers, teachers, and students. And as the user growth exploded, they couldn't even manage the costs. That is when they took a decision that, okay, we had several questions for themselves, and finally they were convinced that we can actually work on this for the next 5-10 years. The amount of value users were getting was insane, and that pushed them constantly. But before they thought they'll build this entire Replit thing, what they started was they started building a school classroom. And they started pitching, selling, and making money out of it. The platform which they were developing for school was a tool that could run coding classes and evaluations on the same device. So that is how they started it. But at some point they felt they were getting deviated, and schools started asking so many features that were not part of their original vision. And that's when they thought maybe this is not the right way for us, let's take a step back. And they decided to bootstrap, and they had only one employee. And then they got 3 to 4 rejections from YC. And another connection how they had with YC was the Code Academy guys, they introduced them to YC, and YC actually helped Amjad to get the visa and everything to relocate to US. So that is how they were familiar with YC. So their natural next step, and since a lot of VCs were rejecting, they thought, why don't we apply for YC and see how it will happen. But they applied 4 times and they got rejected all the 4 times. But again, that didn't stop them from going further. And this is how they were pitching to schools. As I told, it was just a software they were trying to develop for classrooms, especially for to develop coding environments. And there's one picture where Amjad is the founder who's pitching to a school. It was actually making money, but as I told, it deviated from their core vision. And that's why they didn't want to do it further. So now the biggest turning point for them was at Y Combinator. As I told, they already got rejected, but that didn't stop them. And since there was a lot of positive feedback from a lot of companies in YC about Replit, so Sam Altman, who's one of the partner at YC Combinator, he DM'd Amjad on Twitter, and they met and they got along really well. An interesting part is Paul Graham is another partner and founder of YC. He was quite active and he identified them. He asked Sam to actually reach out to them. And that's why they had an email exchange, and he was very impressed with his thought process. Like Amjad was quite impressed with Paul Graham, and we all know that Paul Graham's essays are famous world over. And the night before YC was closing on applications for Winter 18 batch, they had to send an application. But by that time, actually, Haya was quite frustrated. Like, okay, we have been applying, they're getting rejected. Should we actually do it? But then they took some courage and they recorded a video and they sent it. And next day they had an interview with Michael Sibyl, who's one more partner at Y Combinator, but the interview was quite tense. So they had a lot of nerve-wracking moments. They were not quite happy at all. And they felt like it was very intimidating, and they didn't have any hope that they'll actually make it to YC. In fact, after that, they just came out and they in fact booked an Uber. And that's when they got a call saying that please come and sign the papers. That's how they eventually got selected for YC, and that changed the trajectory for them completely. And this is the picture from the Y Combinator interview room. Like they had an interview at room number 3, and this was the picture of the founders. And after the interview, they went out. As I told, they booked an Uber, and this was just the final picture they were taking. But then that's when they got the call and they just went back into YC. So YC experience, we know that many companies have completely changed their trajectory thanks to YC, and Replit was no different. But the very first day once they got selected, Sam made it very clear that the next 3 months are going to be very tough for them. They'll be working very hard, unlike how they worked until now. And that gave them the right trajectory. And Amjad asked his brother Faris Masud to drop off from his university in Jordan and come and join them on this journey because they felt this was a lifetime opportunity. So before they actually went on to do other things, they actually worked a lot on improving and rewriting their existing infrastructure because it was quite slow. And in fact, that was actually against the rules of YC because YC accepted them as how they were. But now that they were changing, it was against it. But they actually broke the rule, and they got away with it. See, one point is, as long as you're successful, things don't matter much. And the biggest mantra which they went ahead with was a week-on-week improvement was the mantra, and which something that laid their foundation for the next 3 years as well. Because that's what YC keeps pushing the founders. They want people to measure their improvements week on week. Do not forget about 3 months or 6 months, just focus on this 1 week. What is the improvement you're making? So every week they started improving it, and they released tons of features, and they were getting incredible feedback from the developer community. In this way, everything was going quite smooth for them, and they had just 5 days for the demo day. And so this was the day, like whiteboarding pick they have. They had so many things to cover. It was utter chaos, but they took the risk, and it paid off for them handsomely. So they had a lot of things. They just were going by the demo, like how many days it is, by what date we want to do this, by demo day, what do we want to be prepared with. All of them was planned. The best part was, in spite of doing so many things, the user growth never stopped. It was accelerating at a great pace, which was a good sign for them. And they put up a good show on the demo day. Eventually, they were able to get funded by Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the top-notch investors in Silicon Valley and highly respected. So now that they got funded, they thought their problems will be over, but that's not it. In fact, new problems started coming in. And I'll just tell you, and also I'll just show you one more picture, like how exactly Replit looked by the end of YC. So this is how they've completely changed their entire infrastructure and made the app much more robustic. And this is the picture which depicts that. So as I told you, overnight success for 12 years. Because if you see in the first step, he started in 2008 as just a small project on Python. And after that, he worked on an open source project for 2 more years. In 2012, he put up a small landing page. And after that, he completely neglected it for 5 years. And then eventually he saw that things changed, and there was a lot of user growth and feedback that was coming. And the early signs that people are actually paying for it, even with a lot of bugs, and at an MVP stage, was a good signal for him. So that's how they completely transformed, and now they're a successful company, and that's why I'm calling them like an overnight success for 12 years. So as I told, they were growing like crazy, and they couldn't keep up with pace as all sorts of users started adopting the platform. They had crypto miners, and the sad part was they were attacked by hackers. But the good part again was Amjad had background in security and thing, and so he fought back with them for 2 months. And in fact, he reverse attacked the hackers. So that was a level of sophistication which Amjad had, and that's because of which he was able to avoid the cyber attack on Replit. And they reverse attacked the hackers, as I told you. And now that they've got money, they committed some hiring mistakes. See, that's again one natural mistake a lot of startups do, right? The moment you get money, you're in a rush to actually hire people. But that won't always go well. And the same thing happened here for them. They felt they made some brutal hiring mistakes, which they could have avoided completely. And they were not happy with the company culture, because earlier they were just a small 3-member to 5-member team. So even if things were not in process or the process was not followed, it was okay. But now that the team kept expanding, they had more problems that have come in, and they were not happy with the culture, and they felt that they were not productive. But the best part, as I told, one thing about Replit is the user growth never stopped. It just kept on growing. And that's when he actually got a $1 billion acquisition offer from a competitor who, in a typical style, said that either we'll acquire you or we'll kill you, because they had big money and all. But Amjad, it was a very difficult decision for him whether to accept it or reject it. Finally, he decided that he'll reject it, because they felt they couldn't let down their developers, users, and the YC and the people in Silicon Valley who trusted the platform so much. And they always believed that there is so much more potential for a platform like Replit, and that's how they have rejected the offer of $1 billion acquisition. So this reminds me of a story of Snapchat as well, right? When they were at a very small stage, Facebook offered them an acquisition for $3 billion, but they rejected it. And after that, at some point recently, Snap became a $100 billion company. But of course, now the shares plummeted, but that's a different story altogether. But it was brave of Amjad at that point to reject a $1 billion offer, especially after having to struggle so much, relocating from Jordan to US and just, focusing on the paycheck and all that. It was a brave decision from him, and I think we should definitely applaud that. And the next step, yes, as we all know, COVID happened in 2021. And the best part, since Replit was always suitable for a remote first approach, since it was a collaborative software, user growth exploded like crazy. So there's just no stopping of the user growth. And because of that, they were able to raise $80 million at $800 million valuation from some marquee investors. And in fact, the way they made the announcement on Twitter just went viral. And the reason for it is, this is how they made the Replit picture, like how they've raised the 80 million funding. So, and they've just included all the people who have, and you see like some amazing and outstanding investors have invested in the Series B round. And this is how this gave them a lot of arsenal now to go rapidly. And because of this, they were able to grow quickly. And now they are a team of 70 people, and yet they still believe that they are just 1% of what they're planning to achieve. They think of Replit as a digital economy that lets developers build something on it and make money out of it. Like how we discussed in the analogy previously, they want developers to have this place. This is their space where they can quickly build something and sell within the platform. That's why they're trying to build this end-to-end platform. So that's one part of it. So briefly, if you want to touch upon features of Replit at this point, it's for all skill levels. Like as I told, it's in an in-browser IDE, like integrated development environment. Real-time collaboration is possible, GitHub integration. There are more than 50 plus languages you can actually use it for. You can host and deploy. There are learning resources, team plans, API and plugins. All this is part of Replit. Of course, you can check their website for further details. So if you see, like as I told, it's an incredible journey. It's too hard to believe, where they completely ignored the product. It was just a side project, but the users started using it. A lot of bugs, and people were paying it right from the beginning, which was a good sign for them. YC rejected them for 3 to 4 times, yet they didn't lose hope. They again got back a message from YC. They applied, but it was again not smooth. The interview was very tough and intense, yet they were able to make it. And after that, they were completely in the right trajectory. So final takeaways, if you ask me, as I told, the first thing was Replit made money from early days as their API brought in thousands of dollars a year. That's excellent validation for any company in the early days. As I told, if people are willing to pay for your service, irrespective of whether you realize your complete vision or even if it's in a nascent stage, the design is bad, all these things actually doesn't matter as long as people are paying for it. So that's an early sign for them that they were building something which was worthwhile. And as I told, as long as your product solves a critical problem, users are completely okay with bugs. So please ship your MVP as soon as possible to get user validation. If let's say you're not getting viral user growth, we have to quickly pivot and try to see what actually works and that actually sticks. It's never too late to get back on your little side project if you see a significant user interest. YC rejected them 4 times, yet they made it the 5th time. So a rejection at one point is not the final thing. And just because they didn't believe at that point doesn't mean like your product is worthless or anything. There are so many other factors which investors take into consideration before they accept you. So whenever there is a rejection, just try to analyze what made them reject. It doesn't mean that your idea is bad or anything. So that is something you should be super clear about. And decisions that are too risky at one point are worth taking if you believe in the outcome. So as I told, they had a number of situations where they had to take tough decisions. He had a very good job at Facebook, but he had to quit that and get on this Replit building full time. That was a great decision he has taken. He wanted to relocate from Jordan to New York. So New York is a completely new place. So like this, they had a number of places where they had to take an important decision, and that really paid them pretty well. The biggest thing is, as I told, rejecting a tempting offer in the short term can actually bring multiple dividends in the long run. As a result, they rejected $1 billion offer, but you never know, given the potential of the platform. It can probably go on to become a $50 billion or $100 billion company. You never know. And that's what they're hoping for. And it's okay to take a step back and improvise further. As I told, once they got funded, they started hiring, but they knew that this was not going in the right direction. Rather than going stubbornly, they took a step back and see like, okay, maybe this is not how we want to build. This is not the culture we expected to have. So they took a step back and tried to revamp everything in their capacity. And then again, they started in the right direction. And hiring and firing is definitely part of the game. So nothing personal there. It's just about right people at the right place creates the right team. And that's what any startup would require in the initial days. And as I told, always have a look at the customer signals to understand your idea's potential. So always have that ear for users to see how exactly users are using it. And they can actually drive the product ideation in the best way possible. And I keep repeating it, overnight success can be several years of work put together, and in Replit's case, it's just an overnight success of 12 years. So it just didn't happen one day or 2 days, it happened over 12 years. Just to show one tweet of Amjad on the team growth. In 2017, there's still a very lean team. It was just 2 people, 18 they had 4 people, 19 they had 8 people, 20, 16 people, and 21, 40, and right now they're just at 70 people. Although they're close to a unicorn valuation, the team strength is just 70. So that kind of explains like how exactly a lean team can be, especially with high potential. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope the journey was interesting, and I wish you got to know a bit about Replit and what all it takes to actually run and build a startup. Nothing is a straight line. Let's be very clear about it. Unfortunately, startups are over glorified outside, but there is a lot of pain, sorrow, and a lot of other things that actually happen before you get that success. And that's what Replit story teaches us. There are a number of things which we can take super inspiration from. The first thing, as I told, ship fast, do it with bugs. Just see how well users are taking it, lapping it up. Is it actually solving a critical problem? And that's the whole point, right? If it's actually solving a critical problem, people will just use it in whichever form it is. So this is applicable for most of the startups. So like this, there are a number of takeaways. So I'll share this learning space in the description below in this video. So please go through it yourself just to have a better idea, or if you want to dig a little more deeper. So we also have some resources on the right side if you want to just have further read on this. So this is how, and the best part is I did all this on Zuperly platform, where it was quite simple for me, and it was actually fun to just personalize all the blocks according to my need, and have different combinations of how I wanted to use it. And I definitely had fun. If you really want to have fun in a similar way, try signing up for Zuperly. We will reach out to you very soon. So that's it, folks. We'll come back with another interesting company very soon, and keep watching this space for more Zuperly Talks. This is completely an unbiased version, where, as I told, we are only taking things which actually inspired us, and we wanted the bigger community to actually benefit out of it. So that's the whole idea of doing the Zuperly Talks. So please do share it in your network and share it to people which will actually help them. Thank you so much. I'll see you all soon then. Bye bye. Signing off, Kapil Reddy and rest of the team of Zuperly.